All right, hello there. Welcome to the second episode of the Three Bucket Podcast, where we break down philosophy, emerging technologies, and self improvement content. Now, my name is Aditya Dewan, and today we have a very special guest, Shri Anumakonda, who's a 14-year-old AI developer who's been working on autonomous vehicles with Udacity and doing some sick stuff in the data science field. So, Shri, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, Aditya. Thanks for bringing me onto this podcast. What is what I've been doing? So, yeah, right now, I've been working on localization algorithm and for autonomous vehicles. Localization is basically the question of where am I in this world. So, like as an example, if I were to give you like the world map, and I ask you to tell me like where I am, I could be anywhere. I could be in like Puerto Rico to like Peru in Australia. But if I were to give you this data point of like the Eiffel Tower, every single country in the world is narrowed out except for France and Paris. And just from that single data point, I'm able to tell almost exactly where I am. And in this case of autonomous vehicles, given this data, given this GPS data, given these landmarks about like traffic lights and maybe buildings, localization asks the question, where am I in this world? And the question could be as simple as GPS. Like, why not simply use GPS? And the main problem with GPS is the fact that GPS tends to have these inaccuracies of 3 to 10 meters. So basically what that means is I was driving on the road, I could probably be driving right into like the middle of Lake Ontario or something. Or I might be driving like straight past through a building and into like a bunch of pedestrians. So GPS obviously is inaccurate. So what happens in this case of localization is we use something known as a particle filter, and given this input GPS data, we try to make a rough estimate, and based on these rough GPS estimates, we try to reiterate and re-optimize.
Wow, okay, straight up, that's really cool. So, yeah, that has some pretty sick applications in the autonomous vehicles field. So, basically, the entire point is that since GPS is inaccurate, you are using a new type of algorithm to make sure that autonomous vehicles don't, like, just straight up kill a bunch of people.
Right. GPS is kind of like, it's kind of like a rough estimate. It gives a really rough estimate as to where we are. And then given like landmarks, like traffic lights or buildings, then I make a better estimation as to where I am than where I was before.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. When do you think that autonomous vehicles will come to market anytime soon? Like, what's your view on that?
My view on the autonomous vehicle market is simply the fact that I think right now the main focus will be on level 2 systems, so like Tesla Autopilot and Comma AI's OpenPilot. So ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems, I think that's kind of where the market is right now. I think Sebastian Thrun phrases this in a beautiful manner, saying that it kind of going to like the question of LiDAR versus cameras, and Elon Musk's, Tesla Autonomy Day speech where he talks about LiDAR being, if we use LiDAR, we're all doomed, and he just calls it like freaking stupid. So the view on the way Sebastian phrased it is like, this is kind of self-driving is more like an experiment. You just gotta see what works, right? Tesla's doing cameras and radars, and Comma AI is doing something like that too. Waymo's using like the whole fleet of sensors, LiDAR, radar, it just put everything together on your car. And it's kind of like, it's just a thought experience, like which one reaches to level 4 autonomy. Level 4 autonomy basically when we can just kind of like throw out our Uber drivers and the car can drive itself. So I think right now we're in this like I would call it an R&D stage still, where we're trying to get basic commercialization and just see what works. And with Tesla, with Comma, trying to gather data through camera and radar, and making sure we build a self-driving car that legitimately works and doesn't drive like straight into a pedestrian or
Yeah, definitely. Also, for those of you guys who don't really know, autonomous vehicles today are like classified on a scale of like 1 to 5. So there's level 1 autonomy, level 2 autonomy, level 3 autonomy. Basically, level 1 is like no autonomy, you're in full control of the car, 100%. And level 5 is the car is in complete control and you basically don't need to do anything. So currently, I think we're around like a level 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, level 2, level 3.
Yeah.
Nowhere near level 4. Level 4 itself is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. I know Waymo has claimed to reach level 4 autonomy in some regions such as Phoenix, Arizona. But then again, that's kind of like for a specific region. And,
Yeah.
we as humans, is that like here in Mississauga, if we drive in Mississauga, that doesn't mean that, oh, we're level 4 drivers in Mississauga, but we're like level 0 at like Toronto or something. And that's kind of, so level 4 top means you are standardized. And that's kind of what makes self-driving such a challenging problem is, can you drive in regions which are unmapped? And can you drive in regions where you don't have extensive data to make predictions for?
Yeah. That's a challenge with AI in general, like collecting enough data to make inferences. Like, I think that's one reason that some people say that Tesla has an advantage over companies like Waymo is because I think Tesla has something like 2 billion miles worth of data, and
Right.
Waymo has like 20 million. And that's just, it's almost like 100 times more data, right? And like,
Yeah.
the AI field, it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. That's kind of the best way to phrase like machine learning itself as a whole. Because you have good mapped data, you have labeled data, then obviously your model can learn a lot more. And in the case of Tesla, they've driven a lot with, they've been using like passenger data as well. So to kind of like have these Tesla drivers, record their data and give a better idea for like an AI model to be like, oh, okay, this is how a human drives, and I can learn to drive like that too. And in the case of Waymo has an interesting approach. They do map out regions. So in the case of Phoenix, they've completely mapped it out with LiDAR, radar, whatnot. And what they do that's kind of fascinating is they focus on simulation as well. And simulation is a very interesting concept. And is it possible to simulate human behavior? I don't know. It might be possible, it might be not. But simulation is definitely a tool that has been used to compensate for the 2 billion miles Tesla has driven, and to kind of, I guess from more of like an environmental side, limit pollution. But I think there's very interesting approaches to this. So the real question could probably be like, is there a way that we could generate data better? And is simulation the answer, or is there some sort of AI model, a special AI model that's like beyond computer vision or neural network deep learning algorithms that can find data patterns and map them all together faster and better than any other algorithm known to mankind?
That's very interesting. I guess you could put that as one of the main challenges of the 21st century, and it's also why companies are so obsessed with big data and things like that. Is can you get enough data in a method that's cheap, fast, and efficient, and put it inside these artificial intelligence algorithms so they can interpret that data and make inferences and generate profits?
Right. Yeah. A lot of our AI systems today, it's not even AI in the first place for me. It's just WX plus V algorithms that we just slap on top of each other and find a bunch of numerical patterns. So, going on this like side rant of like AGI, like if we do reach AGI, which might take some time to be honest, if we do reach AGI, can the AGI legitimately find patterns itself, and can that become better than it? Because the reason why we do rely on such an extensive amount of data is mainly because of the fact that neural networks are just math operations, and even like almost every other algorithm is just a bunch of math operations that you put together with ReLUs and tan H's and sigmoids and whatnot. But the main question is that the more data you get, obviously the better the math equation will be, right?
Yeah.
They might be at like, you might like a weight at like 0.0001, but then I might realize that 0.000099, just that difference of like 0.00001 is like a huge game changer. And that's kind of what happens with more data. So the more data you get, you're able to get better weights and better parameters, hyperparameters for your model. And I think, we're not at the stage where we can just kind of like take out like the billions of data that we have for like Instagram algorithms or like, YouTube search recommendations. The more and more data we get, the more and more it becomes better. And, AGI could answer this garbage in, garbage out question where we don't have to feed it like billions and billions of gigabytes of data for it to learn, but rather it can learn to pick up patterns and, algorithms and where it finds a bunch of features itself. And that's kind of an interesting aspect. And reinforcement learning does partially address that question where you have this agent explore. And I do see reinforcement learning as another side rant that it has massive potential in terms of changing the space, because the way traditional, or the way even AI learns is the fact that we as babies, we walk. And when we walk, we fall down, right? But when we fall down, we learn that maybe there was a different way down. Maybe you were trying to walk on one foot, but we realize that we have 2 feet, so now we walk with 2 feet, right?
Yeah.
And the thing with neural networks is that this is kind of all hard-coded through our data, is that if we have good data, we will expect good results.
Yeah.
And if we have good labelers and people who can map and extract the features from these images to produce this X and Y data set, based on the way those data sets are mapped, can you really make good predictions? And can you teach an AI model to actually learn effectively? So with the case of reinforcement learning, now instead of having some sort of person or some sort of third party to actually map out these data, now you can have the agent explore the environment itself. And obviously creating a legitimate simulator, in the case of going to autonomous vehicles, creating a legitimate simulator where this reinforcement learning agent can actually work is what could be a main challenge. And going back to what we talked about earlier, it's impossible to simulate human behavior. Because obviously you don't want a reinforcement learning agent driving your car on the real road. Because the first thing they'll probably do is just smash right into a tree or a building.
Yeah.
So the main focus would be, in this case of autonomous vehicles, can you create some sort of simulator? And
Yeah.
I think the potential for reinforcement learning is yet to be seen.
Yeah. That's actually a rather interesting concept, like the entire field of reinforcement learning. So you're getting an agent and you're training it in an environment where there's rewards and punishments. And it's interesting for, I think, 2 main reasons, right? The first one would be that it's kind of reflective of how humans think in a certain way. Like the only 2 emotions that humans really experience at the baseline are pleasure and pain. And then based on that, you can abstract happiness, anger, loneliness, that kind of thing, right? And it's when you're born, as you were saying, when you're walking and you fall down, you experience pain. That gives you more data points, and then okay, I'm not going to do that. And similarly, that's how we're training reinforcement agents to do this kind of thing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think OpenAI was doing something with these same reinforcement learning agents. If you guys don't know what OpenAI is, it's another company headed by Elon Musk. And it's interesting how basically the point of the game was, there's 2 hiders, there are 2 seekers, find the hiders, obviously. And they literally glitched the game, the agents, so that they could hop outside of the game, glitch back on the opposite side, and see the seekers. Which was how do you figure that out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would assume it made it a cyclic world in a sense where you come out. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting field, artificial intelligence and how it's evolved over the last 10 years. There's this there was this podcast from Joe Rogan and Naval Ravikant, and they were talking about what do you think the next big, I guess, not necessarily AI algorithm, but the next breakthrough in the field of AI. And one thing that Naval mentioned, which really stuck with me, was if you have, right now we have basic neural networks, right? Which are loosely modeled on our brain. You have basically switches on and off, and that's how it works. And what he mentioned was that the problem is that neurons themselves aren't a single unit. There's things inside that neuron, right? There's billions of different switches inside that neuron itself. So to truly get an artificial general intelligence, you would have to put basically neural networks inside neural networks or something, which is next level inception, and that's so cool, honestly.
That's a very interesting point. If you could fit neural networks inside neural networks, and I would assume that has been done, although I have yet to confirm this myself. But I think then again, that kind of goes back to the question: is the AI model really learning, or is it just generalizing on input data?
Yeah.
Right. And in this case of even deep learning itself is a very interesting field, but deep learning is just a tool that generalizes information. It doesn't actually learn. And learning goes back to consciousness. Is that are we separate from our brains? Do we have some sort of external force? Is consciousness that's beyond our brains that helps us make these decisions? And what is the brain? Who even are we? Right? We kind of ask these questions. Yeah, right. And I think for me personally, I think the next big breakthrough in artificial intelligence will occur once we fully understand ourselves and once we fully understand our brains, right? And what's going on right now is in the way Naval put it is that he says that we have billions of switches that he just mentioned within neurons, but we generalize that to be just simply WX plus V. right?
Yeah.
Axon and dendrite, just a weight, and a sigmoid on and off, and just some bias on the side that we just slap on. But is that an accurate generalization of the neuron? I don't know. I would personally say no, because there's so much more to a neuron than just Wx plus b. But then again, that kind of goes back to like, have we done enough research into the brain? Do we know really what a neuron is? Is the answer to AGI just a neural network inside a neural network? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But the answer could be that simple. But then again, going back, that's like, do we know the brain? Do we understand ourselves? And I see, not only specifically for AI, but I think a lot of other fields, even like quantum computing things, it's all focused on, do we understand ourselves?
Yeah.
Do we understand, quantum physics? Do we understand the nature? Do we understand nature in the first place? How nature can be in superpositions and everything?
Yeah.
Do we understand that? And I think what has happened throughout human evolution is the fact that we have evolved, but we've also accustomed more data points, right? And I believe you mentioned this like really well before in a previous post, but you mentioned that humans and apes previously used to have a lifespan around 80 years. The reason why we live fully the 80 years isn't actually the fact that we haven't increased lifespan, but rather we've just taken out the things that killed us before the 80-year lifespan. And that's kind of the same thing here, where right now we've killed all this stuff. We've killed maybe like famines and droughts, where that's the stuff that used to kill us before. But now we've developed this civilization where famines and droughts, in the case of undeveloped countries, are quote unquote a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And going back to the point of like artificial intelligence, it is only through more data points can we make better generalizations and more predictions. Right? And now this question is like, are we a neural network ourselves? And right?
Yeah.
Because now we're just generalizing on previous data. But the more and more we generalize, the more and more rationality that occurs to us, the more and more better decisions we can make.
Yeah.
So in this case, in this quest to artificial general intelligence, AGI, the more and more data points we get through our brains, and the more and more we fully achieve understanding of the brain, can we then make a man-made replication of the brain through deep learning and neural networks.
Yeah. AGI is really just the quest to create a human ourselves. Like, basically the quest to abstract consciousness. I think that would be a good way to put it. And it's interesting because humans themselves are shaped by these data points, right? Like, you were mentioning how, you were born and the walking entire scenario. And it's interesting how humans generalize all their lives, right? Once you're born, you're basically just collecting a bunch of sensory experiences for 80 years-ish. And based on those different experiences, you generalize your own theory about the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you grew up in an impoverished neighborhood, for example, right? And, there was a lot of crime and everything, then maybe based on those data points, you might generalize that, okay, I think that the world is probably a cruel place where the rich always take advantage of the poor, right? Like, that might be one of your conclusions or generalizations. Whereas someone who grew up in a different environment would have something different entirely. And it's interesting how everything that makes a person's identity is really just their collective experiences. And if you took one person's collective experiences, gave them to someone else, would they become the same or at least a similar person?
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting point you brought up about. And this goes, I think this is exactly what brain-machine interface answer is. Can we transfer through a USB stick? Can we transfer experience from one person into another so that quote unquote we evolve because we have now more data points from a different perspective? And the ethics of this is a huge debate, but the main application is in today's world where there's a lot of events happening and we're quote unquote really busy. If we were to take the data points of a person who's been a victim of some sort of case, and we take the brain data of the assailant himself or herself, and what we do is when we take this data, can we map this out? Can we develop not only a better understanding of the person, But then again, in the case of law, we get more evidence to therefore make a better conclusion.
Yeah.
And in the case of what you talked about, living in a poor income neighborhood where high crime rates were a thing, it's can you use this data to not necessarily develop sympathy, but develop understanding. And we as humans try to develop understanding of the world, the good and the bad, through going to different places. Like in the case, what might happen is, well, we're privileged here to live in Canada and live in a developed country. But when we want to understand the world, we need to go to countries and places where people don't have the same rights or the same access to resources such as water, food, sanitation, like us. And it is only when we go to these places, like it might be the other side of the world, like India or places in Africa as well. Only when you go to these places do you really get an understanding. And when I go to these places, I get an understanding about like what poverty is, right? What does it mean to live in Africa? What does it mean to live in places where I have to live in a situation where I don't even know if I'll be getting a meal or not?
Yeah.
How does it feel to live in a situation where I don't even know if I'll be alive next year or not?
Yeah.
Right? And in our case of humans, and going back to this reinforcement learning and walking as a baby, it is only when you go through these experiences do we realize. And sometimes we cripple. Sometimes we just completely fail and we want to get out. Right? Some situations like these are extremely painful. But the result of going through these situations, now the fact that you develop understanding.
Yeah.
And going back to brain-computer interfaces, and is it even possible to transfer brain data to develop understanding? Yes, I personally think it would do more benefits than harms, mainly because of the fact that not only are we able to develop empathy when required, we also get better understanding. Yeah. And if in terms of us being on our quest to be godlike and trying to make sure that we achieve like superiority to mankind and become quote unquote God, these technologies where we can understand other people is a huge benefit, mainly not in terms of understanding. And then again, but you have problems, right, where you're in situations where if like politicians use this data to kind of convey a message that attracts a large majority of your audience, and then ethics, it's like, can I download brain data and use it for like malicious activities? Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, technological advancement cannot be seized, and I think kind of what's going on right now is rather than trying to run away from like artificial intelligence, let's kind of learn to embrace it. But artificial intelligence should not replace us; it should complement us. It should be something that we can use in our day-to-day jobs. So rather than having to do work that can be done by like an AI, like maybe labor work or like moving packages around nowhere else. Right? If AI can do that work, now we have more people who can focus on problems and things that matter. Yeah. Right? We have a bunch of smart people, but they're not in the right places. Right? They're put in places where they might not want to be in, or they might not even be there. They should not even be there in the first place. And when you use AI and automation to help get these tasks done, job loss is a problem. I do agree, but AI creates jobs, and I think we've seen that throughout like the past 5 years. I believe more than 3 million jobs are created, something like that. Yeah. As a result of the AI jobs, data scientists, ML, AI engineers, right? And what happens is now you're put in situations where we have smarter people working on things that make more sense, right? Before we all used to work in a warehouse and move shoes and groceries around a store, but now we've become people that are using AI to actually do this. Yeah. So instead of us being at the bottom, now we've kind of reached the stage where we are superior to computer programming, and we can now instruct other machines and robotics to actually do this for us. And obviously this does result in this quote unquote like lazier environment, as some people would like to put it, where we become more lazy because of the fact that we have AI. But this allows for more time for us to actually focus on problems that matter. And now in this case, we're focusing on problems that matter. AI is a problem. We can fix a problem. And that is through R&D, right? We want to find a way that we can make better AI algorithms without having to spend a bunch of money just trying to label data.
Yeah.
So rather than trying to just adapt with the process that we're in today, rather than just trying to stay in this process where we're caught in this trap that we need to kind of work for ourselves, now we've kind of, quote unquote, obviously this isn't the definition of evolution, but now we've reached a stage where we are not the bottom of the table. Now, instead of us having to do our own work for our own survival, now we are able to program other beings, other computer programs that can do this for us. And I like the way Yuval puts it. He puts it in *Sapiens*. *Sapiens* is the TLDR is just a book that kind of explains the history of mankind, and Yuval proposes a bunch of interesting theories. But basically, the way he says it is that during the agricultural revolution, wheat and other crops were being harvested by farmers. But the case was simply the fact that we were being slaves to the wheat. We were being slaves to the actual crops themselves. And that's a very interesting point. Like, at the beginning, that sounds completely stupid. And, you're kind of like, what the hell is he talking about? But, like, you kind of do realize, like, as you kind of, like, go through his thinking and his, like, rationale, that we are the ones who go through so much pain just to harvest, like a bowl of rice.
Yeah.
We have to plow the whole field, water the plants, put seeds. We do all of this just for a bowl of rice. And how inefficient is that? Yeah. We spent, back in the agriculture, we spent probably 18 hours just trying to do this, trying to maintain that we have plants that are alive and growing. But now we've slaved the plants. The plants have slaved us, right? We've become a slave to the plants because now we're just doing 18 hours of work just so that the plant lives. But what about us?
Yeah.
We spend 18 hours doing this for the plant, but then who spends 18 hours for us, right? And now we've reached the stage where the AI is a slave to us. And now we reach the stage where we can be the crops, where we can just simply just relax right in the middle of a field, and the AI just does everything to keep us growing. And this allows, going back to the point of increased productivity levels, mainly because of the fact that now we're able to focus on problems that legitimately matter.
Yeah. It's very, we were slaves to the agricultural revolution instead of the plants serving us. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I like the way you put it, that now AI are kind of slaves to the human race in a way. But one thing that's interesting to me is, do you ever think that AI will gain a level of consciousness that it'll one day it'll become so advanced, like you said, AGI, right? And it starts to ask itself questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Like the questions that humans ask themselves to this day.
Right.
And
I think the answer to AGI is, that's why I really find the ethics of AGI interesting. Suppose a robot does achieve consciousness, and suppose this robot can think like a human and is being like, why the hell am I slave to this random human who just sits down and eats potato chips all day? But now, in terms of AGI ethics, I think that's kind of what OpenAI is doing. OpenAI has been doing this through GPT-3. Their mission statement is literally, we want to create a world that uses safe AGI, not just AGI, but safe AGI.
Yeah.
Right? And AGI and safe AGI are two different things. AGI is kind of just letting a robot usurp humanity and take over it for its own good. But safe AI is using AGI like friends, in a sense, where you have these friends that kind of empower you, and you kind of empower them, and that kind of goes back to complementing each other.
Yeah. Right.
And the quest to AGI, personally, I think will be a long one. Maybe I'm just overestimating this company, but I think it might take a few decades to get this done. Mainly because of the fact that, we humans don't even know we have consciousness. Some people believe they have consciousness. Some people believe they have, a soul that kind of goes somewhere when they die, to the afterlife. That varies based on religion and beliefs. And some people believe in that. I do. Some people don't. That's obviously acceptable. But going back to the overall point, once we understand ourselves as humans, can we really code this out? And when we understood how our arm worked, when we understood that we had biceps, triceps, and we had all these bones, we had 206 bones. Once we understood that, we were able to create skeletons. We were able to create robotics. We were able to create machines that could move like a human.
Yeah.
Right. And we were only able to do this because we fully understood the art, we fully understood the body, we fully understood how the legs work and how they walk.
Yeah.
Only once we understood that were we legitimately able to build Boston Dynamics robots that can dance. We were able to build robots that can cook in restaurants, right? It is only through this understanding do we really are able to achieve the situation where we can build remarkable creations. And in this case of AGI deals with consciousness in the brain. I believe it is only when do we fully understand the brain, not on basic level where there's neurons, there's a frontal lobe, whatever, but where you need to be in this situation where I want to, not just me, but like, we want to be in this situation where we fully understand the brain and we understand the full ins and outs of it. And if Naval is right with the billions of switches on this single neuron, we want to make sure we fully understand that.
Yeah.
Right? And once we fully understand that, then I would say AGI is possible. Once we understand the brain, AGI will probably take just like a few months to cool down.
Yeah.
Even with a lot of the research we've been doing, right? A lot of the research with like longevity and gene editing, a lot of the research has mainly come down to understanding the human body. And only it is once did we understand the human body that CRISPR-Cas9 and all these other tools come out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my view take on AGI itself. The TLDR being that when we understand ourselves, we can create man-like structures.
Yeah. The key to advancing any sort of technology is to first look within and understand humans. And I think that kind of serves as like a vehicle where we can drive innovation, right? Because if you think at the sheer impacts that AGI would have if it's developed, like the entire premise is that you could have one single entity that is the main problem with humans, I think, is that it takes a long time to become an expert at something, 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
And number two is the fact that it's not scalable. Like, if you have one person with expertise, it's hard to get them in 16 different places where they're needed at once, right? And that's what kind of slows progress. And AGI doesn't have this problem. If you can create a general intelligence which understands things on a level superior to humans, it can literally advance any field if you apply it to it. Like, it can optimize production lines, right? And this goes back to something called the paperclip problem. Like, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, like me and a couple of other people. But the idea is that if you tell an AI to make, like an AGI, right? And you say, okay, I want paper clips. You don't specify how much, you don't specify how many. The idea is that it will figure out how to get a paperclip. It will mine all the resources on this planet to make a paperclip. Then it'll start mining other planets and it'll build rockets and figure out how to do it along the way. And it'll keep doing this until the entire universe is basically paperclips, right? And it's a very, at first it sounds very unrealistic, but if you think about it, it's kind of what humans have been doing, right? Like, not obviously we haven't been trying to make paperclips en masse, but if you look at how we've been evolving over the last couple of years, our objective has basically been go find food, shelter, and water, and that's it, right? Then use those resources to make better food, better shelter, and then find more water supply. Then use those resources to make a grander society with those things. Then you get what I'm saying? And eventually, we've reached a point where, like, almost everyone, at least in developed countries, has access to those resources. And it's become so prevalent that if you don't have access to those things, that's viewed as a humanitarian crisis, which compared to all of history, where most people lived under the poverty line and it wasn't anything new, this is like it's a game changer. And what AGI could do for those kinds of world problems. Like, if you wanted global warming solved, just poof, AGI go solve it, and it'll just do the necessary. And it's such a technical challenge. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And the environmental impacts would be huge. We're already throwing up so much CO2 in the air. Think of how much computing power, how much manufacturing we need to make something insane like that.
That's a very interesting point you brought up. You know, how like, even if you do create this agent, like, what will be the impact of it from like an environmental perspective, like how much compute will be used, and suppose you even do like this. And I really like the way you frame this paperclip problem or this theory, where you're in the situation where the AI will use as much resources as there is for it to create paperclips, and creating this quote-unquote apocalypse through its experiments and its situations, where it just goes through and builds rockets, and then it builds like missiles greater than the nuclear missiles and whatnot. And you're in this situation where you need to find that exploration versus exploitation delta, and where those right percentages come in. And then again, we're now in the situation where now it's not really AGI, because now we're hard coding this. But AGI is a very interesting concept. Right? When we reach AGI, like, what do we do with it? Like, yeah, okay, we tell it to solve climate change, but like, it's not getting. It probably doesn't even know how to speak English in the first place, because it's just a simple computer program.
I mean, it could learn how to speak English, but then
it'll learn how to speak English.
Then the paradox is, how do you tell it to learn how to speak English?
Right, and the other question could be like, if humans create AI, does AI need to be living in a human-like environment for it to foster and survive? Or can an AI learn through internet resources on its own? And that's yet another interesting point, is how, despite the fact that you've created consciousness, would the AI be like a baby, in the sense that now the baby needs to grow up and now needs to develop its own experiences? And how do you teach a computer program experiences? Can you simulate AGI? Maybe, maybe not. Can you simulate the experience of it? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
And
that's
a very interesting point. So
yeah, that's pretty insane. And to think that this might happen in the next half a century. But I mean, yeah. But I mean, going back to, I guess, the more like not necessarily realistic, but more short-term kinds of things. What do you think the impact of like even just so-called narrow-minded AI, which is only good at like one thing? What do you think the impacts will be on the workforce? Because, you know, over the last couple of years, people have kind of sounded the alarm, like, oh, you know, AI is being used for this, AI has developed bias in this, it's done so many things. And you kind of see almost this public, not necessarily a misperception, like it is definitely valid. But the question then rises, like, is AI going to become so developed to the point where humans won't have to work? And then what happens? Then what does the economy look like in maybe 10 years?
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Can you be in a situation where weak AI itself, this narrow AI, can just completely reinvent and restructure the way our economy is even done in the first place? And I believe that my take on it would be what I've mentioned previously about AI complementing us. And in this case of healthcare, AI in healthcare won't necessarily eliminate doctors, but rather it would complement it as a diagnostic tool, right? It's kind of like a therapist, right? When you have some sort of mental illness like depression or something, you go to the therapist and he or she gives you advice, and he or she kind of sits down with you and tries to help you through this problem, right? And AI is kind of like a quote-unquote therapist for jobs, right? Doctors do their job, but AI helps enhance their job. It helps make it better. Misdiagnosis is a huge problem in US alone. I believe it takes around 250,000 lives every year. That's a huge problem. And if you use AI to complement the doctor, if you use AI to help the doctor make better diagnostics and make better decisions and rationality, then not only do you save the lives, but now you have a better doctor overall. But here, the case is, you're not getting rid of the doctor. You're not getting rid of the doctor. But rather, you're using a tool that can help the doctors. It's kind of like computers themselves, right?
Yeah.
When computers were first invented, everybody would think that the computers would take over the job, because if you had like librarians, you could have a computer monitoring system which could use sound sensors to detect noise from locations. That's a really general example. A lot of what's been going on in the world, it's been very complementary, right? With computers, it's made doctors' lives easier in terms of surgeries, and even as in terms of patients, right? Anesthesia and all this simulation where you could create better compounds for vaccines and a bunch of other medicines, where computers have been the pivotal factor for these. It's very hard to actually hand test and make yourself a simulation or some sort of test to a better vaccine. Like in this case of like the COVID world, is there a vaccine better than the mRNA vaccine right now? There are just millions of possibilities humans could do, and whatever goes that, it's not going to be because it's a legitimate hypothesis. It's probably like the next vaccines I've already tested. It was probably because of the fact that the doctor thought about it when they're in the middle of a shower. Not really, not backed up with legitimate science, and that's kind of what simulation answers the question. That's literally what simulation answers this question, where I have data and I have science, and I combine them together to be able to make better predictions. And in this case of narrow AI is going to help humans, right? Even in situations such as like grocery stores. It's a very interesting point where I saw recently that Amazon started its own store, I believe in California, where you can kind of just simply drop the item into the cart, and they have some sort of computer vision algorithm that detects the item and automatically scans it.
Yeah.
So now you're actually complementing the user experience, right? Me as a shopper here in Amazon, like, this is so freaking cool, where I can just like stroll around, and then there's just computer vision algorithm that when I just drop like the pasta into the shopping cart, then it automatically scans it. So now I don't need to wait through a huge line, just like, you know, how we do it like Costco and Walmart, where there's like a huge line that takes like 45 minutes to just get through itself. And then you spend like even more time scanning the items and processing all the checkouts. And rather than having to go through the situation, now you're streamlining this user experience. Now you're, in this case, now you're getting rid of crowds, right, potentially, since not many people have to line up for customer checkout, and rather you have smart systems that help complement human experience.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of shaping the economy, I think it'll actually boost the economy. I don't think it'll completely reinvent it, because I do believe narrow AI is still too narrow, pun intended, to actually, you know, change the economy. So I believe that as kind of like, just to sum this all up, is going back to what I said, AI will complement humans throughout like any field. So self-driving tech, it will complement humans. ADAS systems, right? You detect humans. You can use computer vision algorithms to detect whether humans are facing the road or not. And in the case of accidents, now you have more data. Now you have like legitimate video footage that you can use in terms of like court situations or in law. AI in law is a whole other interesting topic that we could get into, but it's all mainly focused on ethics. Like, can you even have an AI lawyer? Like, is that even possible, or is AI going to be a tool you use as evidence? And, you know, even with like GANs, right, general adversarial networks, that's a very interesting point. Can you fake data? Can you create an AI to fake data?
Yeah.
And that's a whole other topic. But you know, making sure you're staying in the domain of weak AI and its impacts. I do believe AI will definitely complement humans and create more jobs.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. Like, I remember talking to other people about this. I think most people think that it's going to be some sort of dystopian future where AI ends up killing us all. And I mean, the Terminator movies really don't help, but yeah. But I think that's all what it comes down to, right? I mean, if you look at courts today, you have, you know, you might have photo and video evidence, and I mean, today I think what they do is that they look at those kinds of images to see if they've been faked or not, and they try to examine it closely with so-called experts, right? But then the question is, there's probably going to be a point where an AI can generate evidence that can't be detected as false by humans, right? Yeah. And then at that point, it's just like, that I think would signify that we've created something that's not necessarily better than us, but knows a piece of information that we don't, right? Yeah. Like, and I think that's kind of the entire thing. Like, with AI complementing us, it has two main impacts, right? One, obviously, is that it'll help us, it'll make our lives even more easier. But I guess then it comes down to there's more time for humans, right? But then the entire thing is, would happiness increase? Like, if you look at the reason why all these emerging technologies are developed, why we've done everything, ultimately it's for the pursuit of happiness, right? We get rid of diseases because diseases cause suffering, and suffering is the opposite of happiness. We get rid of, like you were working on autonomous vehicles, right? One of the main reasons for that is that, okay, hey, 1.9 million people a year are dying because of this. They don't need to die. That causes suffering for families, for their friends, acquaintances, etc. So, I think the ultimate question would be that, are we just shoving ourselves into a corner? Because realistically, like, if you look at the last 100 years, we're trying to maximize human happiness. But the way we're doing that is very, like, instead of attacking happiness directly, we're attacking it by solving all of these earthly problems. And it's interesting that, where does happiness originate from, right? Like, we talk about, as you were saying, AI complements humans. If we end up understanding the brain, and if we end up fully understanding how it functions, will we be able to use artificial intelligence to help us as a society become more happy?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, right? Are we doing all this for the sake of happiness? And arguably yes, arguably no, right? Elon wants to go to Mars, right? That's his form of happiness, colonizing on Mars, and he finds happiness through solving this problem of being interplanetary.
Yeah.
And I think, going back to what you mentioned about understanding the brain completely, let's say as a general example that maybe our vision, our vision was the biggest source of information we get. So if I saw something that made me happy, right, then if I saw something, that's more important to me than hearing them speak or something. I don't know. But in this case, right now, you have like AI virtual reality. Can you create virtual reality worlds? Can you augment our world? Can you use AI to create a personalized world where you are kind of the top of the chain? And that's a very interesting point, is now you're in this situation where you're placed in this whole other universe, this whole other place where your focus, you're the priority of this place, this world, whatever you prefer to call it.
Yeah.
And I think, does AI solve the path to happiness? Maybe, maybe not. It depends, right? In the case of some people, maybe if you're a cashier at Walmart, in the case of this AI system, you might be pretty upset because it did quote unquote take your job. But if you're a cancer patient who's been falsely misdiagnosed by your doctor, and you have the AI correctly diagnose you, saying that you were actually a false negative, but you were placed as a false positive, meaning that you actually don't have cancer. The doctor diagnosed you as cancer, and the AI actually detects that. Then now AI saves your life, right? And now you're in the situation where you could have gone through chemotherapy and various other situations, and only after going through that did you actually realize the whole time that you didn't have cancer. But now AI just completely U-turns the situation, and now you actually don't have cancer. So a mistake by a human. And I think here there is some sort of happiness here, right? You could have gone through a bunch of surgeries and chemo for being misdiagnosed, right?
Yeah.
And is that happiness? I don't know. Maybe you realize how grateful you are. Maybe luck. Maybe if you do believe in religion, maybe this is like God's blessing. But now you're in this situation where the AI has saved your life, and now you're in this situation where you're like really happy. And even though this happiness might not last long term, it might as well. But you've reached quote unquote pleasure, right? And I think pleasure does occur when you're alive, right? And suppose I were to tell you that you were gonna die tomorrow, would you be happy, or would you be like the most painful situation you've ever been in your whole life, right? Yeah. Knowing that you only have 24 hours left to live. But now you're in a situation where this patient has prepared themselves to expect the worst news ever, right? The fact that they have cancer or some sort of disease. But now the AI comes in and tells the doctor that they've misdiagnosed, and now the doctor reiterates their prediction and realizes that it was a medical error from their end. And now you are in the situation where you're the happiest person in the world. Because just a few hours ago, you were in the situation where your life was coming to an end. But now, a few hours later, you realize that your life has been saved. And that misdiagnosis has, in this situation, has been like the root cause of a situation of, going into chemo and all these rehabilitation therapies. But in this case, now, you are alive. You're quote unquote alive. Now you're in this extreme state of pleasure, right? And what happens is simply the fact that now that you've really been misdiagnosed, and now that you're in this happy situation, you are able to be happy. And kind of going back to this Walmart situation, you are able to understand the power of AI. And in this case of reaching happiness, you have this AI that not only helps you to become a happier person, but it helps save your life. Right? And there are just so many applications of it. Obviously, there are going to be some downfalls of it. Right? That's an absolute fact. And what might happen is, even though there will be a bunch of downfalls, ultimately at the end of the day, it will save your life in some sort of way. It'll make your life easier. And maybe if it makes your life easier, that might be a pleasure for you. But in some situations, it might not be. But at the end of the day, AI is personalized, right? And that's kind of the main factor, is that you have something that's specifically focused on you. It's like, I'm number one. For the AI, I'm the only thing in their eyes, right? They don't have any jealousy or any feelings or anything against. Obviously, that might change with AGM. Like in the situation that we're in right now, we would kind of be quote unquote the god. And all the attention is focused on me. And could that mean pleasure? Obviously. For some people, yes. For some people, maybe not. I don't know. But now you've created a system where all your work and all your attention has been focused on you. And maybe that's kind of what humans require, right? Humans require social validation. And that's kind of the founding basis of us as humans, is that we only thrive when we're in an environment where we are accepted. And AI can be that dude who accepts us as people, right? And going back to this overall point of AI reaching happiness, yes, maybe that is the end goal. For some people that might be, for some people that might not. But AI undoubtedly will be a tool to help reach this happiness.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, that's what everything we do comes down to, right? And even the people who are listening to this right now, is that if you truly want to experience happiness, like I think this is something by the Buddha, like a quote that he said, was that the very act of pursuing happiness is an act of sadness. Like if you accept a negative experience, that's a positive experience. And if you wanting a positive experience in itself is a negative experience. And like as you were saying with the cancer example, like sure, obviously the person would be miserable and it would be amazing, right, if it turns out that they weren't diagnosed. But after a few months, I think that it's kind of like the law of diminishing returns, right? That like there's this, like for example, let's say you're really hungry, like you've been starving for 3 days, and someone drops a box of pizza in front of you, right? The first slice is going to taste like heaven. Like, bro, you're going to fall in love with that pizza, right? Second slice, still pretty good. Third slice, you know what? It's still pretty good. I would eat more. But then as you get to, like the fourth slice, the fifth slice, then it's like slowly you return back down to your base level of happiness. Like you have a little spike, and then boom, you're back down. And that's basically what, if you look at life, that's literally what it is, right? It's just a bunch of peaks and valleys of happiness and sadness, and it's just boop, 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 boop. Like, and you repeat that for 80 years, and then you have human experiences. And what's interesting is that between all of these like ups and downs, you have the power to choose how much it affects you. Like, you can fully determine that.
That's a very interesting point, and I really like that point about does long-term happiness even exist? And
Yeah.
can we be happiness? Can we be in a happiness state for more than a few minutes or hours? Is it possible to be happy the whole life? And would we even call that life? It was just filled with happiness.
Yeah.
What does life mean in the first place? And that depends on person to person, right? And it's a very interesting concept of, right, what is happiness? What do we want as humans? What is our goal here? And why are we here? Right? What is our mission here? And a lot of even us as like humans ourselves are reliant on some sort of validation, and it is only when we are validated are we happy. It is only when, in this case of food, it is only when we are able to satisfy our tongue senses and our taste senses are we able to be happy. And in this case of social validation is being accepted by others. And what does it mean to be accepted? What does it mean to even reach happiness? What does it mean to actually be accepted? And these are very interesting points. And in this case of the pizza slice analogy, can we be happy with every single pizza slice that we have? Right? In the beginning, it's like heaven, and then over time, it's kind of like, it tastes good, like whatever, right? And is it change? Is it constant change that makes us happy, right? Because we have multiple pizza slices, but what happens is we're in the situation where when we have multiple pizza slices, we reach a situation where it's like the pizza slices themselves aren't good anymore. And now what happens is, now should we have different food? It's like, okay, I had pizza and now I don't like pizza anymore. Now should I have rice or should I have something else? Right? And maybe I eat like ice cream and now I get that dopamine hit. Now I feel really good about myself. Right? I feel really good. I've reached happiness again. Well, then again, as I eat more and more ice cream, I'm kind of in the situation like, oh yeah, ice cream is just like whatever. And is it change that makes us happy? That's kind of the main question here.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's a
very interesting point.
And that's what social media does for us, right? Like, I don't even think it's happiness, but if you go on Instagram, it's constant change. That's what it's based off of. That if you scroll once, oh, it's a new meme. Scroll once, oh, this person, like, celebrity drama, I don't know, right? Like, as you keep scrolling, it's something completely new. So it's resetting that entire, like, law of diminishing returns back at the top every second. And what's surprising is that it makes you feel bad at the end. Like, even if it's constant pleasure, constant happiness, it makes you feel like internally like a piece of garbage. And then that raises an interesting point that does true happiness come not necessarily from change or pleasure, but does it come from a sense of acceptance? Like, accepting the fact that something has happened, accepting the way your life is, accepting your goals, your dreams, and accepting who you are as a person, right? Like, if you look at today's culture, honestly, it's very, very hard to thrive in a culture where things like social, and I know everyone talks about this, like, oh, social media has made our generation soft, whatever, right? But if you really look at it, it's interesting because everyone is just comparing themselves with everyone else. Because, like, in this day and age, right? Like, if you ask someone why they're probably, like, feeling sad or low, it's not necessarily because of themselves. Well, it is, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but it's often because of something that someone else did, right? Like an external locus of control. Like, oh, he said this about me, she said this happened, right? And what's interesting is that we allow so many external things to control our internal peace. And ultimately is the fact that if you want, I guess, a sense of internal peace, one of the first things that I think people have understood is essential is you need to have an internal locus of control. You need to understand that there's some... And what's interesting is that there are very few things in life that you can't control. Like, if I went to the previous example I was talking about, where it's like, oh, this person said this, right? In that context, you can still sort of influence that, right? Maybe you completely change yourself and make yourself more likable, right? I mean, you will lose your identity in that process, but let's say for a second that worked, right? Then theoretically, you would boost your happiness, but for what? it's gonna come back down at the same point, right? And I think that for people to truly be happy, they need something to work on that's bigger than themselves, so that they feel like a part of a grander mission. Like, we evolved in tribes. We like that feeling, I guess. And they need a sense of, I should say we need a sense of control. That, we control our lives and we're controlling how it gets there. And if we don't, we understand that since life is so short, we need to develop the skills to control it. Because otherwise, life is just going to be a string of this person said that person said that, and you're dead.
It's very interesting. That's especially what even are we? Who even are we? What is our goal? Like, are we supposed to be just random invaders of this planet? I don't know, but just understanding who we are, where we come from, and that's why the study of the human body is very fascinating, right? Through the study of the human body, do we get a better understanding about not only who we are, but maybe where we came from as well. Right, and it is only through this understanding that we reach quote-unquote enlightenment, where we fully understood the universe. And the human mind itself is remarkable. Like, remarkable is just an understanding of the brain and the way it functions. Right? It is quote-unquote godlike, right? And is it even possible to understand it? I don't know, but it's very interesting overall, just the idea of humans as a whole and who we are in general.
Honestly, I think that would be a perfect place to end off. The fact that the answers to all of our external problems come from within. Happiness, development, everything comes from understanding who you are and what truly you want to become. And over the next couple of episodes, this was episode 2 in the 3 Bucket podcast, we'll be diving deeper into more topics like these ones, and we'll be helping you discover yourself and giving you the tools necessary to truly be successful in this day and age, both to yourself and in terms of society. So thanks for coming, Shri. This was really cool.
Thanks for having me on, DT. That's amazing being on here.